People have asked for this about 1,000 times, and I'm going to finally do it to help you guys out. It's probably going to cost me some money because I do make money installing these. So yeah, if you're going to use my video, hook me up. Buy a gear reduction from me, or buy some arms, or I don't know, send me some money on Patreon or something. I don't know. This is going to save you guys a lot of time and money. These are the tools you need to install a gear reduction on a Rancher 420, old Foreman 500 air-cooled, new Foreman 500 liquid-cooled, electric shift or manual shift for the gear reductions, the primary reductions, 15, 27, 35, or 53. To do a 69, there's grinding, but same process applies. All this applies to most other Hondas too. So here's the tools you need. The steps are pull the seat, the plastics, the skid plate, that's for the clips on the plastic. Pull the wheels, it'll be a 14 or 17. Pull the front diff, two 12s, two 14s, slide the diff forward, hold it out of your ear with a bungee cord. Picks to pull the drive shaft. You have to get the O-rings off the drive shaft boots. Pull the coolant lines. All while this is going on, the first thing you do is use your 10 and drain the coolant. This is to remove the oil filter, so get the oil filter dripping on the bench while you have the front cover off. Zip off all your 10s on the front cover with that. Pull your primary and disc clutch nuts with this. This is the puller for your clutch basket. Hormel's ATV has it, as well as eBay. It's like 50 bucks or something, I don't know. 18mm socket to turn your clutch puller. Reassemble with Ultra Gray. Install a new output shaft seal. There's a part number for pretty much all the bikes. Those are the tools you need. This is the only special tool. Installing a gear reduction for somebody today, and I'm going to try to get them to film installing it, because a lot of people ask how to install these things. We're going to do a 35% on a Rubicon. Hey guys, what's up? So I don't know if you've seen this new thing that's out. It's called Patreon. Basically what it does is it lets you directly fund a content creator to show your support. It works for musicians, whatever, anyone who puts stuff on the internet. I'm just a guy that makes weird videos about riding four-wheelers in mud and fixing them. But this video I'm making right now is actually going to cost me money, one way or the other. Usually my videos make me a little bit or I break even. So if this video is helpful to you and it helps you get your gear reduction done and it saves you from blowing up your motor, it could save you a couple grand. Nothing else, it's going to save you a couple $100 from having to take it to some shop and have some guy who may or may not know what he's doing install it. Not trying to take away business from any of my buddies that install these as well. I just know there's a lot of people who don't have anyone nearby them to install them. They live in the middle of nowhere. They don't know anyone, so this is going to help them out. Also, I do sell these, so if you need a reduction, you can comment on the video, hit me up on Facebook, email me at christianthemudpuppy@gmail.com. However you want. I got pretty good prices on these things, pretty competitive, and I can get them to you pretty quick. So hit me up, and if you want to show your support for me sharing these tips and trips that I've compiled over a decade of installing these gear reductions, show your support, show me some love on here, and throw me a few bucks. And if this works out well and I actually make a little bit of cash on here, I'll make more of these videos and share more of my Mud Puppy top-notch installation techniques. It's good stuff on here. Tried to keep all the bullshit out of it and just tell you stuff you need to know when you're installing these and the common things people screw up. We're going to start out with the front of the cover off the motor. If you need instructions up to that point, they're at the end of the video, but I figured I'd start where most people have issues, which is in the actual front of the motor. So here we go. Cover off. So you got to get all your 10s out, all your coolant hoses, 1, 2, 3. Drain the coolant out of it by pulling that bottom bolt. Get all the 10s out, I say again. Get the O-ring off your output shaft. Make sure it's all clean. It's plenty clean enough, and now it's time to pull the cover off. With the power steering bike, you have a little bit less room, but it's still really not that bad on these models. Some of the other Hondas are a little tighter. I just come over here, grab the cover, give it a little wiggle, and sneak it off to the side. Now, here's where you can see some interesting stuff. This is where you can find out if the bike's ever been sunk. We got to zip off this nut. It's worth mentioning that on this bike, there is no left-hand thread business with this. They are both right-hand thread. With a 300, however, one is left-hand thread, one is right-hand thread. Also, while you got this on the bench, I always like to pull off the oil filter and get this drained. Replacing it with a new OEM Honda oil filter. This makes a little bit of a mess, but it's not too bad. Usually, a lot of the oil's drained out, but by the time you get over there, yeah, not too bad. So, get that off. Oil in this bike, pretty dirty, pretty dirty. Oil container right here. Oh, let's start dripping off. You want to get that pretty oil-free before you go to put it back on, because if oil gets on your Ultra Gray, it can affect it. So you need to rinse down pretty well. Get all this clutch material out of here. Like I said, expect to use a full can of carburetor cleaner every time you do a gear reduction. Buy this up, buy the case. Alright, it's pretty good. Let's let that drip. Face down. Here's a new gear reduction. Okay, let's get back to what we're doing over here. So we got that nut off. So now we got to pull off the flywheel. Not really a flywheel, it's more like you're pulling off the clutch drive plate for the centrifugal. This timing chain looks fine. I always check that for people. Keep those in stock. Once you're at this point, it doesn't take all extra work to change them. I don't think this bike's been sunk very many times if ever, so timing chain looks good. Water's what kills those things. So you screw the clutch puller on here. So there's other ways to do this. You can use a torch and a hammer and a pry bar and risk hurting the case, or worse, I recommend getting the right tool and using the clutch puller. You never want to tighten this down all the way. You just put it on there until it bottoms out, and you back it off about, I don't know, a quarter of a turn. That way it comes off the pull easy once it's off, and you just run this down. This wasn't a very tight one. Sometimes they're worse. So because I didn't run this down all the way, threads off real easy. Sometimes it'll get a little stuck on there if you run it down all the way. So I run it down all the way and back it off like a quarter of a turn, like I was saying. If you're done with that, you don't need it to go back on. Make you a spot to set the nice oily centrifugal clutch. It'll come off real easy for us now. There's the centrifugal. Check it for wear. Looks good. Slight grooving, not bad. One-way bearing looks fine. This is the dry plate. Literally no wear on there. This bike's pretty cherry. Sometimes you gotta mess with that stuff, but check the function of the one-way bearing. It's good to go. Honda manual does not give you a spec for the one-way bearing. They just say visually inspect for wear. Not just visually inspect it for wear. It's good to go. So now you pull off the mechanisms for the clutch operation. Very snickety. You don't have to worry about timing these on these bikes. They have one fat pin, so they line themselves up really well. All right, that looks good. So now we're going to zip off the I guess some people call it the wet clutch. They're both wet clutches. They're both in oil. I call it the disc clutch. Clutch basket. Like I said, there's no left-hand thread business on here. This one never requires a puller, so I like to just get it in there and pull out just the clutches like this. And if you do it like this, you don't have to reassemble them, which is the fastest way to do a gear reduction. If you're not going to change the clutches, which, based on the spec, keep an eye on that little guy. We're probably not, but I'm going to measure these. There's a spec in the manual for how thick they should be and all that, so we'll check that in a second. But they're probably fine because it's a Honda, even with that much clutch material. One thing that's interesting is the 500s and the Rubicons have an extra disc over the 420, and the 420 has an extra disc over the 300, which is why you should get a 500. So, stock basket, stock primary. We've gone as deep as we need to go right now, but we're going to check a few more things. Check for wear on the bushings. It's been pretty good, so I have a good usable core. I like installing these because now I have a core to send back to my boy. I don't have to mess with having someone mail me a core back. Everything in there looks fine. Timing chain looks good. Oil's dirty and there's a lot of clutch material in it, but other than that, this motor's in great shape. Okay, so now we get to install our very pretty, very new snickety stuff. This is the new TIG welded primary, and this is the new basket with the 35% gear on it. So one thing you always got to do is oil up the inside here. There's a brass bushing in here that likes to be nice and oiled. So I get some of this oil. Oil this surface right here, and these gears do break in, right? So ideally, you would change the break-in oil. So see the factory washer right here? It usually stays there like it's supposed to. On a 35%, depending on who makes it, you don't reuse that washer. People screw this up all the time. So on this one, no washer is required. See how it looks at that gap right there on the crank? No washer is required. I'll tell you one more thing to check, but no washer required with this one. Some do require the washer. Most 15%, if not all, require you to reuse that washer. Depending on who you get your gear reduction from, depends if you reuse that washer or not. There's not a problem without reusing it. It works fine either way, so don't worry if you don't reuse it. It's fine without it. It doesn't need it. I've ran these for hundreds of hours with no washer, and it's been fine. So put the basket on there. Very smooth, very snickety. Good to go. Check for clearance with the weld in the basket. Make sure it's not binding. Good to go. These are custom-made parts. You're installing a non-OEM custom-made part. You have to expect that something irregular might happen. So this is the part where I can tell you how to install this, but unless you understand how this motor works, which I'll try to explain roughly, you could screw it up. So the two main ways people mess this up is they put the washer in when they shouldn't, and they don't adjust their clutch properly. So while you have this on the bench, this is your clutch adjustment, you need to loosen this up and grease it and make sure it's free and it's smooth. That way you don't put the whole cover back on and then find out this is seized up and you can't adjust the clutch. If you don't adjust the clutch afterwards, a lot of times it won't work at all. The bike won't move or it won't shift right. If you put the washer on when you're not supposed to, the bike will stall out when you put it in gear. It'll lock up the centrifugal clutch, it won't work. The only way to really make sure that all these things work together properly is if you understand how this transmission works. You can read the manual, it'll tell you how to adjust the clutch, that's fine, but unless you understand what's going on in here, you really shouldn't install a handmade, custom-made part into a motor unless you understand how it works. So we're limited spec, which means they'll last fine forever, because there's so many of them on a 500, but definitely going to advise this guy that next time he has this cover off for whatever reason, if he thinks the bike will screw off the plant, or does timing chain or whatever, he should probably, I'd recommend putting the Dirt Racer clutch kit with the heavy-duty springs and the disc and steels. So now he's got to get this lined up. Sometimes it's a little bit of a trick. Boom. All right, that's it, it's on there. So we need our small nut and our washer. Keep these washers and nuts together, they are different. You need to go back on the same ones. Always start these by hand. The threads are very fine, and I've done a lot of gear reductions. It's only happened once, but I did have one of those nuts strip out of me. It didn't hurt the shaft because Honda shafts are really hard and they're smart about that. But because of that, I keep those nuts in stock. And if they look like they've been on and off a few times, I'll change them. So, this needs to be set. Put that on there nice and tight. You can line it up with the factory groove. You can see where they bent it in there, that little detent, so it's lined up perfect. Good to go. And we'll put the primary on, and we'll ding both of those detents. not the primary, it's centrifugal. I guess it is kind of the primary. Centrifugal goes on to the primary gear. That's a press fit. That's the one that requires you to use a puller, right? Like I said, these nuts and washers, their arrangement matters. Hand start it, hit it with the impact. So there's a clearance here. This can't be locked up. You have to know what you're doing. So you have to be able to feel it. You see how that gap there is closed up? You're going to tighten it down. It's a press fit, right? So that's about the torque it needs. And then you check to make sure you have some clearance here. If you don't have this little noise right here, it won't work. And the reason you won't have that little noise is because you left a washer on. But like I said, some gear reductions require washers. Ask the guy that built your gear reduction if you require a primary washer or not. I do this all by feel. That's the way to do it because it's a press fit. There is a spec in the manual, but I got it down with feel. Okay, perfect. Gears lining up. The primary is not contacting the aluminum on the basket. There's no binding, etc., etc., etc. So now we're going to ding the nuts to make sure that they don't back off. Not that they ever would anyways. Okay, that's nice and in there. That's not going to come loose. And then where we lined up here, it's not lined up perfect here at all. So I can spin this and use the one way. So let's get it lined up. But it needs to be neutral for all this, obviously. Okay, that's not coming off. Stuff, such a technical term. The trick here that no one can ever figure out is you center the shifter. All right, center the shifter, get it lined up, and it goes on so much easier. Look at that, stab, done. Okay, on the 300 this is a little different because this thing always wants to fall off, but down here it's all on the snap ring. No worries. But also, if you read this, it says, notice, filter seal faces out. I'm not gonna name any names, but if you put an oil filter in backwards in a Honda, it'll mess up the motor. Don't do it. All right, public service announcement done. So now we're going to verify that our clutch adjustment is adjustable. Hit that. Get our flat blade. Make sure this is good to go. On these newer bikes, it's really rarely an issue, but on like a 450 Foreman or an air-cooled 500 Foreman, I've seen a lot of these lock up, and it's bad mojo, so I'm paranoid about it. This one is very nice and smooth. So we're going to go, see it says increase, decrease. So we're going to go all the way to increase play, and then once we put it on there, we will adjust it. Perfect. There you go. So increase. So there's going to be a lot of play in the clutch until I go in here and I adjust it. Now we've got that taken care of. We're going to clean this case a little bit more. Get all this junk out of here. This is really the amount of clutch material you expect to see when you're running big tires on a bike without a gear reduction. So the difference between a Honda and a belt drive is if you run big tires on a stock Honda, it slips the clutches a little bit and nothing happens. On a belt drive, it slips the belt a lot and you don't make it home because your belt broke. So it's a pretty good alternative. Check this O-ring. So there's 3 O-rings. They all need to be on this side when you start. This one goes on this dowel pin. 1, 2, 3 dowel pins, 1, 2, 3 O-rings. And then there's 2 more dowel pins to line the case up. They both stayed on the case side. That is where I prefer them. Good to go. So we're going to clean this up, scrape all the Ultra Gray off, put new Ultra Gray on, and I'll start the video up again when I'm putting the case on. This is probably the most time-consuming part of the job, is getting all the Ultra Gray off and getting it really clean. Explain how this transmission works a little bit, or at least what happens in the front cover. So piston delivers power through the connecting rod to the crankshaft. That's your crankshaft right there. The crankshaft spins this inner part of the drive plate, right? It's splined to the crankshaft. When you hit a certain RPM, centrifugal force slings out these weights, which grabs this bell, which starts to deliver power to the bell, then to the primary gear, from the primary gear to the basket gear. That's your first reduction. We call it your primary reduction, right? So then that's locked together. When you shift gears, this shifter turns this, which turns this little diamond plate. There's 3 bearings in that case that turn, pushing in on the clutch disc springs, disengaging the clutches, taking the bind off the transmission for a second, allowing it to shift gears. The shifting gears happens in here. It happens because of the thing back there with the little shift drum, and there's a little slot, and there's selectors, but yada, yada, I don't even understand all that. But what you gotta understand is, this is not connected to this until these clutch weights sling out, unless the power is coming in the opposite direction. When you're engine braking, the tires put force through the transmission, through this gear, to the drum. The way that the drum applies force to the crank is the one-way bearing that sits behind the centrifugal. That's all you get. It's all in the manual. But we're going to put it back together now, and I'm going to show you how to adjust the clutch. Ultra Gray is clean and dry, so I got everything clean. It's drying. I'm putting in my new OEM Honda oil filter, one of the best. There's the part number. Spring, oil filter, seal facing out. Check the O-ring. Check the O-ring. They're both on there, and they're good. And then you got your 3 8mm. Out your seal now before you put it on the bike. This is the old seal. Yes, it probably would have been fine because it's a Honda, but it's a couple dollar seal and you can save someone having an oil leak on the trail and getting water in oil. So throw the old seal away. Put it together with no seal on it. Once the cover is on the bike, then put the seal on it. Grease the shaft, clean the shaft well, put the seal down in there, install it with a seal driver or a big socket, whatever you prefer. But always put a new seal, because sometimes you'll roll the little spring out of there and you have an oil leak and it's a rookie move. Cleaning and scraping, we've got all the Ultra Gray off both surfaces. Both surfaces have a thin layer of Ultra Gray spread around them, and we're ready to put it back together. Things to remember before putting the cover back on the motor is, do you have all three of your O-rings in their proper locations? By all three, I mean 1, 2, 3 O-rings. Do you have both your cotter pins in the case side? 1, 2 cotter pins. Do you have these 3, not cotter pins, dowel pins. Do you have these 3 dowel pins? Big one, medium, small one. Okay, that's all good to go. Also, is the line, this pin in your camshaft, aligned with your water pump? Yes, it is. Usually it won't be because you probably had to turn it a few times to hit the detents and line everything up, yada, yada, yada. Check that. That'll fight you. Okay, all those things are satisfied. We are good to put the cover on the motor. Also, make sure you have the seal out, and also make sure you have your clutch adjustment set to the most play position. All right, boom, cover's on. People fight with that. No reason to. If you do those checks I just did, it will go on like that every time. That's this motor. A 300, not so much. 300 is going to fight you almost every time because you're fighting a kickstart. Okay. Okay. So now install all your tins. There is a Honda bolt-in that came out that tells you the proper procedure for tightening down something with Ultra Gray. Obviously, you tighten it down kind of like a cylinder head with a crisscross pattern starting in the center. Boom, 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 boom. Shouldn't have to tell you guys that. You're all professionals. But what you're supposed to do is, I put all the bolts in now, and I torque down 2 of the outside bolts. Allow it to sit for 10 to 15 minutes, and then I torque down the rest of the bolts. What this does is it lets the 2 layers of Ultra Gray tack up a little bit against each other and make more of a gasket. If you tighten it all down now, it pushes out almost all the Ultra Gray, which is kind of how it is from Honda, but there's a bolt-in coming out from Honda Automotive that says to do it this way. So, put all your bolts in, get your tin back on, and snug down that bolt and that bolt. Okay, so those are snug down. And while those are sitting there snug down, I'm going to go ahead and install my new output shaft seal. We're on to our second can of carburetor cleaner. That's what I charge for shop materials. Nice and clean. Yes, a little bit of that went in the motor, but we're about to change the oil, so it's fine. Get a clean rag. Clean this off. Output shaft's nice and clean. Open your new seal. As you can see, Honda is amazing, and it comes with grease in the seal. I like to do this. Helps it go on a little easier. Use WD-40 for everything. It's not really lubricant, so it doesn't stay around very long. And then you gently, 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 some people put tape around this groove, but it's not necessary if you know what you're doing, finagle the seal into its seat. Boom. Didn't roll the spring or anything. Now we got to push it in. With what, you ask? I like to use a, what's this, a 28 millimeter socket. It's about the right size driver to go in there, so you can actually push that seal in with your fingers if you got really strong fingers, but this works fine too. Put that on there. Gently tap, tap, tap. Boom, installed. You want to make sure that seal is sitting in there nice and straight. So run your finger around it, check how deep it's sitting down in there. That's perfect. All right, now's a good time to clean and reinstall your O-ring for the front output shaft. This is what seals the front output shaft to the drive shaft. And before you put the drive shaft in, obviously you clean this O-ring now. And before you put the front drive shaft in, you're going to grease the crap out of those splines. This grease makes everything last longer, and you use it in abusive water type riding. So we got the O-ring on there, good to go. O-ring's in fine shape, no need to replace. Okay, and while we were doing all that, the Ultra Gray was hardening, so now we can torque down the rest of our bolts and do the clutch adjustment. So, start in the center. It's like you torque down a cylinder head or a wheel or anything else, anything you want even torque on, you do a crisscross pattern. One of the first things they probably teach you at most automotive trade schools. You end up walking back and forth around the bike a little bit, but you'll get a better even pressure on the front case, and that's what you want for a nice tight seal. It's obviously, these bolts aren't aligned in an exact grid, so you can afford to improvise a little bit with your crisscrossing. So let's tighten down and get even now. Finish off the last 2, 3. Get underneath it, hit these 2. This one's kind of a pain in the butt to get to, but I just like to get up under here like this. On this, you just need a 14 millimeter and a flat blade to adjust the clutch. See how it says increase, decrease? You go, so we already have all the way to increase. So we turn all the way towards decrease play until we feel the slightest resistance. Slightest resistance. This way you gotta make sure this is greased and free. If you can't get a good feel on, you can't adjust it properly. So get slightest resistance right there, and then boom, quarter of a turn. Right, so half turn would be here. So you go in the middle of that. Quarter of a turn toward increased play. Check our feel here. So that feel right there is the slack and the linkage. You go a little farther, ooh, that little, you want to feel a little slack, then some spring, then it gets tight. That's what you want. That's actually starting to turn that arm in there that's disengaging the clutches. Perfecto. So we got that adjusted right. Hold its position. with your flat blade, tighten this down with your fingers, and then cinch it down with the 14. Boom, doesn't have to be super tight. And then you can check it again by feel. That slack doesn't mean anything. Slack and linkage again. That right there, when you feel a little bit of resistance and that bottoms up, that's what you're looking for. Thing's just gonna shift. Perfect! Clutch is adjusted. Clutch was a little bit out of adjustment when it started because this thing, you know, was turned a little too big of tires without a gear reduction. But so that's on there. Clutch is adjusted. We got our new output shaft seal installed. Now we're gonna put on all our coolant lines, tighten up all our coolant line clamps, etc., etc. All your hose clamps. I like to use a little impact with a 6mm because I'm a professional. Some of it's in fast forward, so it's not as painful, but this should be interesting. A little bit dirty. Usually start with a little bit cleaner of a bike, but let's use a bunch of carb cleaner on the front half of the engine. Not a huge deal. It's a nice Rubicon. He's got the high lifter 2-inch lift. The small BKTs on here, the 8x16 measures out to a little taller than 31. But I should say it measures like a true 31. Definitely a sweet bike. So plastics, you pull these guys, and then you got to do all the little plastic clips after these annoying little Allen bolts. That wasn't very tight. Try to get this one done quick for this guy. He drove pretty far, but definitely appreciate the business. These small BKTs, these are the 144s, not the 171s, which I run on the Razor. I'm running the 33s, but they're really nice because they're super light. They're better on axles, for sure. And they just rob your bike a whole lot of power, so you can still feel pretty quick, even though these 500s only have about 29 horsepower at the cranks on a good day. So, pretty awesome tire to run on these bikes. There's some special tools for these plastics, but I find a small pair of dikes to be the most effective. They have snap ring specific pliers, but I'm not a huge fan. Not snap ring, plastic body clip pliers. With those pliers, you usually end up having to pull them completely apart and put them back together again, and that costs you time in the other direction. So, might as well just use these. These pins have probably never been out before, though. They're not tore up at all. The bike is pretty cherry. I wonder how many hours that's on it. Let's check. Let's check out the snorkel job too. I wonder how they did it. It's always interesting to see, man. Everyone does a little different stuff with their snorkel setups. Still has all. I also clean my radiator meticulously and frequently. Plastics are a little bit of a trick to get out. This hose down here really should be snorkeled. I'll tell them about that. You gotta pop it off the coolant line there. But it's about the only trick, really. And just slide it on out. Alright, the wheel's just barely off the ground. He's got aftermarket wheels, so he's got 14s. Very nice. At this point, you got the bike pretty much ready to start ripping apart. Got your tires out of your way, fender liners, plastics, skid plate, obviously. Get your coolant drained out of it. I leave the oil in the motor until after I do the whole thing, then I dump it. It just helps get a little extra contaminants out. And right now, at this angle, all the oil is dumped into the back motor anyways. You don't have to mess with it. And that's the way that seems to work best for me. That's how I do it. And so now we got to mess with the front diff. There's these two bolts, these two 12s. Got the high lifter arms on here. Shocks it maxed all the way out with the high lifter bracket lift. Interesting way to mount his power steering unit. Because he's got the radiator on, so he lost his mount. But these arms are pretty good. My issue with them is that they throw the alignment off a little bit because they're made to fit a bunch of different bikes, so they kind of split the difference between all those bikes. And my other issue with them is that they're not adjustable. And my other issue with them is that they squeak. They do give you grease zerks, but as you can see, he doesn't have his grease zerks on his. Yeah, he's missing all 4 of the grease zerks, so that's not good. He can't really grease these. Probably going to be pretty squeaky at some point, but oh well. I'll need to mention that to him too. Hopefully he'll watch the video, because I'm going to forget to mention all this stuff to him. So yeah, you pull these two 12s out, and you got two 14s, and that loosens up the front diff. Enough for you to slide it forward to get the dry shaft out, which then allows you to get the cover off, right? Right. You got it, right? You got it, right? Okay. Get those off, and we need a big impact. Half inch stride 14s. And a wrench. Come right here. You can tell how cherry on these bikes are generally by how these bolts come out, because they do start to get tighter as the bike gets a little more wear and tear on it. And more times people have them taken out. That's like a front spacer piece, and once that's out of the way, the reason Honda puts that there is that gives you the room you need to move the front diff. Alright, so now the diff is loosened up. Sneak this bolt out. Sometimes it's kind of tight because there's springs in the drive shaft that are pushing the diff forward right now. So if you push back on it and up, the bolt slides right out. See how clean that is? Man, this thing's pretty cherry. And then you get a bungee cord. This part is key. Good bungee cord right here. Right here. Get some tension on it, and that's going to help when you pull it forward. And then you need one of these little pit guys. Harbor Freight set of these is super cheap, and they come in extremely handy. They don't how you can get these O-rings off without hurting anything and maintain the leak tightness. I just leave it right there. You go all the way around, break that rubber loose. Because you want this one to slide apart. It doesn't have a spring in it, the back one does. So this one slides apart, saves you some time. There we go. That's how tight it was. It's still suction. So put one hand on the bottom of the diff, one hand here, sneak it out, push the shaft back because I got that boot rolled off. Came out real nice and kept the rest of the shaft assembled. Nice grease in there. And then people screw this up all the time. Get your little pick again, and you roll off this O-ring. If you try to take the cover off with that O-ring still in the output shaft, it's not going to work out very well for you. You've got to keep track of all your O-rings too. And then you clean that. Not that I'm going to reuse that seal anyways, but it does help it come off a little bit easier. Clean around the case. The engine in this thing's actually pretty clean, just the airbox looked dirty and was kind of scaring me. Clean all the way around the case and keep as much contamination out of the motor as possible, especially one that's as cherry as this one is. If you're probably wondering if I have an electric shift, how do I do it? Well, I would tell you you're wrong for buying the electric shift in the first place, but it's the same procedure, just to deal with little gears on the front, but nothing a manual can't tell you how to do. And these respond okay to a gear reduction with electric shift. Generally prefer not to do it, but so now I'm gonna get some extra lightage in here. Targeted the lightage. Light is key. You must have good light. So that tucks in right there. Now we can see what we're doing. So I leave that one alone. Now it looks pretty clean, but with the better lighting we can see that we're going to get a little cleaner before we pop the cover off. Not a huge deal. So what I do is loosen up this top one. It's got some mud in it. And then you take off either one of these really. Whatever one is easier, doesn't matter. So this is a power steering bike. Another thing I'm not a fan of, but to each his own. And if you want a 2017 Rubicon, you must get power steering. You don't have the option to suck up and be a man anymore, but it is nice. I ride a couple bikes that have it. Just loosen that up, pop that baby out, let it drain some more coolant, pull off that vapor lock in the system, and just flood both ways a few times. Wiggle that. Take this and I twist it around up here. Keep that out of control. I say to plug it or snorkel it. Never leave it alone if you're going to water ride, because it'll let, see all the sand that came out of there? It'll let mud get up in your on the back side of your water pump, and it'll cause that seal to start leaking prematurely. So if you snorkel, it's good. It's a weep hole though. It's there to let you know if your water pump's leaking. So if you move it up higher, it might not warn you, and you could get coal in your oil in the event that your water pump goes bad. But these bikes so seldomly go through water pumps, I don't really worry about it. So, whole thing doesn't have to be spotless. Ideally, it's the way to go. You always want to clean this thing out, but you really want to make sure that seam is clean, because that's where you could introduce some shit in the motor. All right. Now you zip off all these tins. If you know what you're doing, you can hit all of them with just a deep 10 on a 4-inch driver. Some people use an extension and a swivel. This is the fastest way to do it. Don't mess with these on the water pump. No need to do that. These two on your oil filter housing, on your long ones, obviously. And then these two down here are kind of tight, but you can get to them. Zip that one off.